If you're struggling with your one-handed backhand, this video is for you. Make sure you subscribe and throw this video a like. It really helps the channel. So there are a couple things you got to know about, and the most important in order to hit your best backhands is the grip itself. So when it comes to your hand, please make sure you're aware of your base knuckle of your index finger and the heel pad. Those two spots have to go on a very specific bevel on the racket. First, make sure you get your racket on its edge. That gets the correct orientation. And just know that the very top bevel, think, a bevel is a flat side. It's an octagon. There are 8 bevels. The top bevel is the bevel where you want to put the base knuckle and the heel pad. That's called the Eastern backhand grip. So I take the heel pad and the knuckle and I place it straight on top. If you notice, if I open up my hand, you cannot see those two spots. They're covered up by the racket. You don't want your racket like this. You don't want the heel pad exposed. That's why it's actually nice to put those spots on your hand and then grab onto the racket. You can even open up your hand and go, they're covered up by the racket. That just makes sure that your hand and racket relationship are correct. Again, this is called the Eastern backhand grip. So next we want to know 5 swing checkpoints. Checkpoints are places you can stop in the swing, or let's say you record yourself hitting backhands. You should be able to push pause in that video, and at certain places in the swing, you should be able to see certain things. And I'm going to take you through each checkpoint and what you should see in your own backhand. And if you're not seeing these things, I think that might be the reason why you clicked on this video, because you know your one-hander can be better. So the first checkpoint is the ready position, and I'm going to quickly walk you through each one, and then I'm going to go in detail for each. But the first checkpoint is the ready position. Checkpoint number 2 is the unit turn. Checkpoint 3 is the drop. Checkpoint 4 is the contact, and checkpoint 5 is the finish. So checkpoint 1, checkpoint 2, checkpoint 3, checkpoint 4, checkpoint 5. So again, those are places you should be able to stop a video if you film yourself, or even just shadow swing looking in a mirror, and you should be able to see certain things in each checkpoint. So checkpoint number 1. Now this is basic, right? This is the ready position. That's the same for all strokes, but let's make sure your ready position is really good. I've watched a lot of online coaches recently who talk about the ready position should be relaxed and athletic. I completely disagree. As an amateur, we need all the help we can get. And just like dominoes in a row, you tip the dominoes and each domino's job is to knock over the next domino. That's really the job of each checkpoint. Each checkpoint is trying to help the next checkpoint be right. So if your ready position is great, it helps the unit turn be great. So in the ready position, feet wide, knees bent, split stepping as your opponent hits. I want your racket to be vertical in your ready position and not laid over to the side. I kind of call this rocking a baby to sleep. Get your racket up. If I take a coin, I can balance a coin on the edge of my racket. Obviously, if I'm like this, the coin's gonna drop. So you gotta get your racket up. The next thing is I want you to notice my elbows are out. I tell my students when I'm coaching, I say, I should smell your armpits. Let me smell your armpits. And that just makes sure their elbows are out. If I took a tennis ball and put it under my armpit, it would just drop. Most players pin the armpits down or the elbows down. You don't want that. Again, each checkpoint has to help the next checkpoint be right. And when your elbows are out, that actually helps your forehand and it actually helps your backhand be correct. And I'll show you that when we get to checkpoint 2. Also, if I show you from the side, I want you to notice the distance from my racket to my body. My elbow in front of my shoulder. My elbows are not down and my elbows are not back. Get your racket out in front of you. Have a truly ready position. It's not called a starting position and it's not called a waiting position. There's a reason for that. Be ready in your ready position. And I'm sure I look much more ready here than I do here, right? So you gotta have a true ready position. So that's checkpoint number 1. And by the way, you can do that in your forehand grip. But the moment the ball comes to your backhand, you're gonna change your grip, assisting by turning the racket as well, right? Kind of like you're grinding pepper. You're gonna turn the racket and turn your hand simultaneously to help you find that Eastern backhand grip. You're in your ready position. Again, you can smell my armpits. If we had smell-o-vision, you can smell my armpits. My elbows are out. The moment I see the ball come to my backhand, I'm gonna start turning my body side on to my target if I'm hitting this way. I'm gonna change my grip and I'm gonna turn my body, and a couple things should occur in checkpoint number 2. Again, it's called the unit turn, so everything should be going back. I don't want to take my racket back without my body, and I don't want to turn my body without my racket. As a unit, everything is going to turn. Now at this point, a couple things you should see in your own swing. First, I want you to extend your arm. I know you'll see pros in this position, but when your arm is bent, you now have 2 things you've got to worry about. You're going to be moving your shoulder, and you're also going to be moving your elbow. And all that does is complicate that calculation as you're swinging to contact. So instead of feeling like it's locked, where people almost like complain that it hurts, don't lock your arm, just extend it. Have it extended, and then the only thing that's going to move is your shoulder. And a lot of times when players have their elbow bent, it's very tough for them to get below the ball for topspin. They end up just swinging into the ball, and it can also cause tennis elbow. So when you turn, extend your arm. What I like to tell people is push the palm to the back fence. Again, if I'm hitting the ball that way, then behind me is the back fence. So elbows out. As I turn, I use my top hand to turn the racket that moves the bevel over to my knuckle and heel pad. As I move the knuckle and heel pad over to the bevel, they kind of meet in the middle, really makes for a great quick grip change. I'm going to turn and I'm going to push my palm to the back fence. That's an easy way to extend the arm. The next thing I want you to notice is that the racket is around head level. So I don't want you taking the racket down low, and I certainly don't want your racket way up here. Right? Goldilocks. We want to be right in the middle of those two. So we're going to turn right like this. My arm is extended, my racket head is above my hand, and it's around head level. But the last thing I want you to notice is this back elbow. Remember in my ready position, I have my elbows out, and I talked about how the elbows out will actually help you later on in the swing. When you turn, and it'll be easier when I show you this from the back view, but when I turn for my one-handed backhand, I don't want my elbow down, because I don't want my strings to face the sky. You watch so many players who struggle with their one-hander, and they turn and their elbow is below their throat hand, the hand that's on the throat of the racket. You want your elbow and your hand to be level to each other. What that does is it creates a vertical racket face. Let me go off camera here for a quick second. If I take that coin again, when I'm in my ready position and then I find my turn, my unit turn, I should be able to take that coin and again put the racket or put the coin on the edge of the racket. Look at Shapovalov hit a one-handed backhand. His racket is so straight up and down on the turn. I love using him as a great example for my juniors and adult amateur players. So I'm in my ready position. I change my grip and I take my racket back. I push my palm back. One thing I didn't notice, and you'll see this from the back view, is my upper arm here is pushed in against my chest. I don't want it out like this, I want it in. That actually helps us later on in the swing what's called inside out toward contact. So don't have your hitting arm away from your body, actually press it up in against your chest. Back elbows up, racket around head level. Again, I've changed my grip to an Eastern backhand grip. So checkpoint 1, checkpoint number 2. Now, checkpoint number 3 is called the drop. Now, I don't call it the racket drop for a reason. I just call it the drop because this is really where we want to see some synchronization between the body and the racket, where the body and racket are moving together and in the same direction. Most players in this position, most amateur players who struggle with their one-hander, drop the racket only. Well, it's going to be pretty tough to get below the ball, especially if the ball is around thigh level. And getting below the ball and swinging up and out toward contact is really vital and really necessary in order to get topspin. So one of the easy ways to get the racket below contact is to not just drop your racket, but to drop the body as well. You'll notice my height now and now my height. So I'm going to turn, and then when it's time to drop my racket, I'm also going to drop my body. Vic Braden called this sitting in a chair, like sit and lift. So you want to get your body and racket going down. But you don't just want to think drop the racket and drop the body. You also have to make sure that you tilt the racket down toward the ground. I cannot, let me find that coin again. I cannot take my coin and put it on the edge of the racket at this point. Most amateur players who struggle with their one-handed backhand have their racket in a position, it'll be easier to see this from the back view, they have their racket in this position where a coin could sit on the edge. That's not what you want, because if the racket is on its edge in the back, it'll be open when you hit the ball. This is why most beginners hit the ball way over the fence. Because at contact, the racket was open, because in the back, they had their racket straight up and down, because they thought, well, I want my racket straight up and down when I hit the ball, so why not have the racket straight up and down prior? That's not gonna work though. You need your strings to be slightly tilted. Think anywhere from 30 to 45 degrees. And you're gonna use your left hand to help tilt the strings down toward the ground. When you drop the racket and the body and you tilt the strings down with both hands on the racket, notice my non-hitting hand is still on the racket at this point. Very important. When you tilt the strings down, that allows for checkpoint number 4, the contact, to be right a lot more often than it's wrong. At this point, I'm below contact, and now I'm gonna start pushing off the ground. It's a great power source using this lower link from the knee down, pushing up and out through contact. Strings are pointing down, and from this point, I start lifting my body and the racket to contact. Since my strings were tilted down here, called a closed racket face, now my strings are facing forward at contact. If your racket is on its edge, it'll be open at contact. If your racket is closed at this point, then your strings will face forward. For consistency and for a reliable backhand, having your racket straight up and down at contact is really where it all boils down. I don't really even care what type of swing you use. If you can get your racket straight up and down at contact over and over and over again, then good for you. But what I'm showing you here is really the most efficient way and the most reliable way for that to happen. So I'm in my ready position, my elbows are out. I'm gonna turn my body sideways toward my target as I push my palm back and change my grip to the Eastern backhand. My back elbow is up. I could take the coin and balance it on the edge of my racket. And from this point, I then drop my body, I drop my racket, and I close my racket. I then come up to contact, and as I come up to contact, I'm gonna be brushing from low to high, getting that ball to spin over itself. When you can spin the ball, it helps the ball then go leave your racket going slightly up to clear the net, but then it puts high pressure on the top of the ball and actually pulls the ball down for a reliable and consistent backhand. From here, I'm then gonna make sure that I keep my body sideways. Remember, I was facing my target, my opponent, at the beginning. I turned sideways, or actually slightly past sideways, but then I wanna stay sideways to my target. And the way I'm gonna do that when I'm done is I'm gonna move my non-hitting hand back after contact. Remember, I talked about how important it was that we drop the racket with both hands. This is vital. And the reason is you have to have the non-hitting hand on the racket when it gets to the back leg, because then the non-hitting hand has a place to go. So many players, I see, amateur players, they let go way too early, almost at the beginning of the drop. When your non-hitting hand lets go at the beginning of the drop, it will then be pulled forward towards your target. Yeah, does Wawrinka stay sideways on his one-hander? No, he's a freak of nature in the way he hits. Again, probably you and I put together, our athleticism doesn't even equal Wawrinka's and what he can do on that backhand. Even Federer said he wishes he had Wawrinka's backhand. So I don't think we can just copy the Wawrinka finish and just say, okay, it's gonna work. It's not. We've gotta stay sideways to give ourselves a chance to track out toward the target. So we're gonna make sure we keep the left hand, or the non-hitting hand, on the throat of the racket during the drop so that it has a place to actually go back, keeping the body sideways. You'll see that I'm swinging from below contact to above contact. The more I swing up because of the topspin, the more the ball spins down. And when I'm done, my non-hitting hand's behind me. Notice my body is facing you even though I'm hitting the ball that way, and my racket is way up high in front of my head when I'm done. Let me show you this from the back, because I think especially the finish is going to be completely different than maybe something you've ever tried. So you'll notice I'm hitting the ball that direction. You'll notice my elbows are out. So most amateurs, their elbows are in like this. In fact, I get videos sent to me all the time from people on social media, and if it's a one-handed backhand, really any stroke, forehand or backhand, two-hander, if they show me a video from the back, one of the first things I look for is, are their elbows protruding out to the side? And so you can see the difference between this ready position and this ready position. You want this ready position. So again, for the forehand, for the backhand, whether the two-hander, you want those elbows out It really helps the contact point to be correct later on. So from the back, you'll notice my elbows are out. The moment the ball comes to my backhand, I turn my body. You can see the racket is still up above the hand. That's going to allow me to get gravity-assisted racket speed as the racket drops. Elbows are out. I turn. You'll remember this back elbow up. We don't want the racket flat where I could take a glass of water and lay it on my racket. That's not what you want. You want your racket straight up and down. Again, each checkpoint helps the next checkpoint be correct. If you remember, checkpoint number 3 is where the drop, and we want to make sure that the racket closes. We want to tilt the strings down. Look at Wawrinka when he drops the racket. His strings are tilted closed. That's what gets his strings to be facing forward when he strikes the ball. How is it so easy to get the racket closed from the checkpoint number 2? Have the racket on its edge. You'll notice my elbow and my hand are the same height. As my elbow drops, the racket opens, and when the racket opens, it's going to be less likely that I close the racket in checkpoint number 3. So I've got my elbows out. I'm going to change my grip to the Eastern backhand grip. My arm is extended. I'm actually pushing my palm toward the camera. Racket head and my head are at a similar height, and my back elbow is up. I then adjust to the ball. When I'm ready to drop the racket, I'm not just going to drop the racket keeping my height. I'm also going to drop my body. I'm going to drop my body to make it easier to get below the ball. But then it's also a power position where I can then push up and use the energy from the ground to go into the ball and have more stability and power through the shot. Elbows out, ready position, change the grip, back elbows up, racket's the same height as my head. I drop my body down as I close the racket. Notice both hands are on the racket. And then I'm going to swing up and out. Notice it's called inside out. So I don't want to be contacting where I'm pulling across. I want the contact to the left of me since I'm right-handed, so I can swing what's called inside out, away from my body. That's actually the best way to get topspin. If you swing inside out, if any of you golfers, you'll know what I'm talking about here. If you swing inside out, that actually makes sure that at contact, you're swinging vertically up the back of the ball. So I'm below the ball with both hands. I'm going to start swinging from below the ball to above the ball. I don't know if you can see, but with this Topspin Pro, the ball is spinning. The more I swing up, the more the ball spins down. Topspin is really, and really spin in general, is what tennis players use to control the ball. Beginners tend to slow their swing down to gain control. High-level players embrace spin by actually swinging faster, and they impart that, or they allocate that extra racket speed into making the ball rotate. Think about a bowler and the way a bowler spins the ball. That's actually how they control the ball. I'm a terrible bowler, so I just throw it down the middle of the lane and I cross my fingers and hope something good happens. That's why I don't bowl very well. So you want to harness spin and use it as the way we control the ball. So we swing from low to high, brushing up the back. Now here's the finish that completely changes the way people execute their one-handed backhand, and it gives them a ton of control. A couple things. Remember, I'm hitting the ball that way. First, notice my body is not facing my target, but it's to the side. My non-hitting hand is behind me. That was a way as a counterweight to move my non-hitting arm back, helps keep my body to the side. And you'll notice my racket is to the left of my hand. That keeps the angle I had at contact between my arm and racket intact, and it just shows up in the finish. I know you'll see Dimitrov make this move. Wawrinka, the racket goes to the right of the hand. If you do that and your backhand is awesome, good for you. If you do that and your backhand isn't awesome, which is probably why you're watching this video, then I've got a great tip that's going to help you. If you're right-handed, and just reverse this if you're a lefty, if you're right-handed, finish with the racket to the left of your hand. It doesn't have to be flat, obviously, but it's what I call the left side of the letter V. Think about the letter V, right? So I've got the letter V. It's actually like this. The letter V here. Have your racket to the left of your hand in what's called the left side of the letter V. In fact, when you're done hitting a one-hander, let's say I'm hitting the ball that way, I can actually walk toward my target under my racket. It's called the archway. Finish with the racket to the left of your hand as a right-hander, and you'll be shocked how much control you have. So let's go over this again. I've got my elbows out in the ready position. I'm gonna split step as my opponent hits the ball. I'm gonna turn immediately the moment the ball is hit, extending my arm, changing to an Eastern backhand grip. My back elbow's up and I could take a coin and balance it on the edge. I'm then gonna move around in this position. I'm then gonna drop the racket with both hands as I drop the body and step out toward my target, toward the contact really. When I drop the racket, I'm gonna close the racket, which helps my strings face forward when I actually strike the ball. Make sure that your racket is not on edge at the drop. Make sure the racket is closed. I'm then gonna swing up to the ball and away from my body. Notice I had both hands on at the drop. Because my left hand, my non-hitting hand came forward a little bit to my left leg, to my back leg, I can then swing it back as a counterweight that keeps my body sideways, keeping my racket swinging out toward my target. I'm gonna swing low to high, and I'm gonna finish with three things: the body to the side, my non-hitting hand behind me, and I'm looking at my target under my racket. My racket is to the left side of my hand. Finishing this way takes your one-handed backhand consistency to a completely new level. If you have any questions, please throw them in the comments below. This is such a fun series of videos that I'm making. Doing all the strokes. I did the serve, I did the slice backhand, here's the one-handed backhand. I'm about to get rained on. I can already feel the drops happening right now. Again, if you have any questions, please throw them in the comments below and I'll be sure to answer them. Thanks again.